Greetings. This is a little bit different video. I'm just putting together a very brief video here to kind of introduce a documentary to you, and I would hope that you take a look at it. It's an hour-long documentary. It's done really well, and I just wanted to give an overview of what it's about to try to convince you to watch it. So this is a documentary that's put together by the Epoch Times. It's the first documentary movie on the origin of the CCP virus, Chinese Communist Party virus, tracking down the origin of the Wuhan Coronavirus. And it's done by Epoch Times investigative reporter Joshua Philipp. And there's a picture of him. And this is what you would look for in YouTube. It should have that photo on the left. Okay, I thought I would start out here with a couple slides on my own because in this documentary that I think is really great, there's no background on China. So just to give you, take a couple minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about China. So this is how Chinese people see themselves. This is how China sees itself. You know, the panda bear, everybody in China's, loves panda bears, but, they think it's a big gift to the world, and I guess it is. They're kind of cool. On the right, Chinese culture all over China. There's more UNESCO World Heritage sites in China than any other country. You have the Great Wall, you have the Forbidden City, you have this terracotta army here. And there's different ways of looking at this. A lot of times, most of the time, when you're looking at Chinese culture like this, you're looking at a demonstration of how an emperor can get a lot of Chinese people to die building something, like a tomb like this. How many people died making this terracotta army? I don't know. They say that, the Great Wall, 8 people died for every meter. So you have a nice piece of culture there. You have the Great Wall of China. But look how many people died making it. Anyways, I have mixed emotions about the World Heritage sites, but they're kind of cool to see that culture. We don't have anything that old in North America. So then you have, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend Native Americans. We do have things that are that old, but we don't have things that are that old that most Americans know about. So then we have Chinese food. You really have to live in an area with a really high Chinese population to see real Chinese food. You see dumplings here on the upper left. That's something you don't usually get in a Chinese restaurant in downtown mid-America. But Chinese food is really good. It's, there's better Asian food in the world. If you look at CNN, I think, makes a list of the top 100 dinners in the world. And, Thai food dominates more than Chinese food. Then on the lower left, we have, a Chinese lady. So a lot of people, appreciate the beauty of Chinese ladies. But the reason I put it in there, there's different ways of looking at that. I have a lot of Chinese contacts. Almost all of them are ladies. Because, for business contacts, I'd rather deal with a lady than a guy. Because a lady's not going to rob you blind. That's not the first thing she thinks of when she sees you. But you got to be really careful about your Chinese friends. I try to get it out of them really quick. Are they pro-Chinese Communist Party or are they not? Most people are not. Almost all Chinese people don't like the government, but they won't come out and say it. So it takes a little while to sort them out. But if I notice that somebody's really gung-ho Chinese Communist Party, I don't want to be friends with them because they're not good people. Then what do we have? We have the way the world should see China and the way a lot of people who know China does see China. So on the upper left, what do we have? We have a table here, a long table with a bunch of nurses, a bunch of babies on the table, and then a bunch of parents, I guess, behind them standing up, probably yelling at the nurses because that's what Chinese people do. But what is this? Is this coronavirus? No, this is way before that. This is, when the air pollution level in some of the cities in the north, Beijing and further north like Shenyang and Harbin and places up there really far north, when the air pollution level is 400 and they advise old people and babies to stay inside, they mean stay inside. So this is what happens when babies go out in this massive air pollution. They end up with, respiratory problems, and they have trouble breathing, and people rush them to a hospital, and the hospitals are overwhelmed with babies because they shouldn't have been outside today. Then we have endangered species, and Chinese people would wipe the world of animals, wipe out all animals just to satisfy some kind of medical thing. They'll kill elephants off just to have some ivory because they're Chinese. And, they'll kill, sharks just to get shark fins. There's, the WWF, if you go up there and take a look at the endangered species, you could see that a lot of endangered species in the world are just, due to China, just China. And then the middle picture here, Orange River, there's massive river pollution in China. Every time you have fish in China, they're loaded full of toxins and heavy metals. They still taste pretty good, but I wouldn't eat Chinese fish more than like once a week. And then there's a continent of plastic in the Pacific Ocean, and there's studies have been done to determine just about all that plastic comes from 7 countries, Southeast Asian countries, and China. And then on they throw their plastic in rivers, or they throw it directly in the ocean. They throw it in rivers, it winds up in the ocean. And then we have Shanghai on the right here, upper right. Rising sea levels due to global warming. This is what Shanghai would look like if the sea level went up 2 feet, I think. And you can see this is probably taken from the Shanghai Financial Tower. You can see the Jinmao Tower on the left and the Pearl of the Orient Strait. And then on the lower left, this could be a picture depicting Chinese river pollution, but it's just one of my examples of disregard for human life. Okay, we have 1 million dead fish, and we're going to just hire some villager, that came to the big city to get a job in construction or something, and say, hey, go in this river and clean up all these fish. Don't worry about it. It killed the fish, but it's fine. It's safe. And then massive air pollution. I was in China during the 2008 Olympics and before the Olympics. In China, Beijing made a lot of factories close and relocate because the factories were west of Beijing, and they added to the Beijing air pollution. So they got rid of them and they made them move, and a lot of them ended up going and creating cancer villages. They moved their factory to a little village, doubled the size of their factory, and now they're spewing these toxins out on people's fields instead of the city of Beijing. And then the next picture, Chai Jing, this is her masterpiece of a documentary, Under the Dome, which is maybe, 5 years old now. And this was a self-funded documentary by this lady who's she's an investigative reporter too. And, she was pregnant, and she made this documentary, which really is a masterpiece. You should look at it, Chai Jing, Under the Dome. But it was banned, in China after a couple days being up. And then on the right, this is something that I'm more familiar with, Chinese forced joint ventures. I consider myself to be a pretty well-rounded expert on China. I advise Western companies. I'm a consultant. And here, you have a Western company like Volkswagen who wants to do business in China, and the Communist Party, they make up their own rules. They say, okay, if you want to do business in China, we're a developing country, and you have to have a Chinese partner. And your partner, Volkswagen, is going to be the Chinese company FAW. Oh, and by the way, they're probably going to build a plant and sell Volkswagens out from the other plant to Indonesia, which is what happened here. Chinese companies will steal everything from a Western company. They'll steal if you ever heard of out the back door, that's the way of life in China. Then more recently, we have coronavirus and what's happening to the world. On the lower left, you have France, and then you have Italy, and then you have Spain, and then Germany's on the right. And this is, I think these figures are a day old now. I didn't grab these lately. 1.5 million people across the world are infected now with, we're pushing 90,000 deaths now. And this is what the US of A looks like now. Lots of red stuff here, lots of infection, a gift from China. So on the upper right from Fortune, you have coronavirus, bird flu, swine fever, why China is still so susceptible to disease outbreaks. SARS and COVID-19, both of those are coronaviruses. So, China is just the epidemic, center of the world. That's where viruses happen. New York Times, coronavirus outbreak risks reviving stigma for China. Well, yeah, this is a stigma that they're not going to outlive. This was an early article by the Times here. Of course, due to coronavirus, this is going to be good for a couple generations. You'll be telling, your kids and your grandkids that you lived through coronavirus. And naturally, since China really messed up the world, the Communist Party's machine has started running, their propaganda machine. So here's some idiot from China, somebody Zhao. It might be the U.S. Army that infected the Wuhan fish market. Yeah, it could be the U.S. Army, or it could be you idiots. So, this is the kind of propaganda you see here. This is something that they're publishing now throughout all of China. This is for Chinese people to read. It might be the U.S. Army. Do you have any reason to think it's the U.S. Army? You hear some crazy stories, but no, it's not the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army did not go into a fish market and start shopping around and distribute a virus. And on the right, this is just an example of a misconstrued story. This is they'll pick really good, legitimate stories. Like I just had a lady from Thailand send me a story and say, is this true? They arrested some kind of American professor from Harvard because he brought coronavirus into Wuhan. Yeah, the story is true. We arrested a guy who's a Harvard professor for taking money from China, and we also arrested a bunch of Chinese people for intellectual property theft. Had nothing to do with coronavirus. That's the Chinese twist to it. On the right here is another twist. Some American study. Some guy said that the coronavirus didn't come from the fish market because there was earlier cases than the outbreaks at the fish market. And he said that there were definitely cases there, but that wasn't the origin of the virus. So the way this was put into Chinese news is it was intentionally misconstrued, and it said Wuhan wasn't the origin of the virus. Well, that's not what the guy said. The fish market wasn't the origin of the virus. Of course it came from Wuhan. So they're doing stuff like this. They're paying people all over the world to open up fake Twitter accounts, or they're pirating accounts, and they're putting out a bunch of fake news to make it look like China has nothing to do with this virus, and that's what communists do. Okay, so that was the background. Now let's get into this documentary a little bit. So I really suggest that you watch this. I think it's a really good documentary coming at a really good time. So this is part one, the story of the Wuhan seafood market. And I'm not going to go into much detail. I just want to show you the sections. So here, it's December 30th. Somebody started noticing a continuous occurrence of pneumonia cases of unknown cause coming from the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan, China. So this got leaked out somehow by the Communist Party. And then what they did was they just went to this Wuhan market and they closed it and they disinfected it. They sprayed it down for a couple days, destroying all the evidence. And then they locked the place up. Okay, and that made the international news and gave them a lot of good news. They got a lot of recognition here for closing down this fish market or seafood market. But the thing is, a lot of Western people look at it as, you just destroyed all the evidence. Are you sure that the virus came from here? Because, it would have been nice to investigate the place before you just closed it down and fumigated it. So here's, this documentary. The guy that wrote it is on the left here, and he's got a lot of experts that he talks to. So Dr. Sean Lin here has a lot to say about, where he thinks the virus came from. First of all, 14 out of the first 41 people had nothing to do with the seafood market. So a third of the people, were never visited the seafood market. So the seafood market, somebody there did get sick. And then everybody started getting sick that went there because it's, these markets are really tight, cramped, that's hard to push yourself through the market sometimes and, buy whatever you want. And, that just doesn't fit that you have 14. 1/3 of the people were not affiliated with and didn't come close to anybody who was at the seafood market. That and the seafood market doesn't sell bats. China came out right away and said that this is a virus that's similar to. It's definitely a bat virus, and this is what they call a wet seafood market. In other words, a lot of the fish here, the seafood, whatever, they're alive, and you go there and they butcher it right for you, right in front of you. That way you got a fresh fish if it's just been butchered, or other types of seafood, or they also sell poultry there and pigs, I think. So a wet market like that is a good place for viruses to be hopping around because you got a lot of blood from butchering people. That's a point where you get a lot of virus activity is if it's in an animal as you butcher it. That's one of the dangerous points of handling animals with viruses when you butcher them. So the author here gets a lot of people to talk to him, Joshua Philipp, and he gets a lot of experts. He knows where to go to get expertise because he's a good investigative reporter. He's been around for a while. So here's another issue is this lady here says that, it would have been impossible for the virus to spread, to the seafood market from people that weren't there because of the incubation period. It takes a while to spread human to human, especially when you have a 2-week incubation period. And these earlier cases were just, like a week before the seafood market started getting infected. So she's just saying it's impossible for infections to travel that fast, when you don't have that many cases yet. You have 41 people infected, not, 4,000. And 41 people, they all got it relatively the same time, except for, a few people were before, earlier infections. And there just wasn't enough time to do the human-to-human transmission. But there is another place in Wuhan, which just happens to be one of the biggest, bioscience places in China, and it's in Wuhan too. So there's another, and also they work with bat viruses here. So this is another place where you could have gotten a virus, but this place wasn't investigated when the authorities came to look and see, what might have been the, source of all these viral infections. They didn't bother looking at this, big laboratory here. And then we have, the first patient 0, the first patient to get infected. And that's her on the upper left. It was a graduate student who was working, as a graduate student in this laboratory. So we'll talk more about that later. But this was another obvious place to look. And this girl, the two white pages you see here, the Chinese internet is going crazy because they're asking what happened to this girl. She was here, now she's gone. And the rumor is that she died. She was patient 0 and she got infected in the laboratory and she died. And her profile and her thesis were missing from the site. Everybody else who had worked there and left, they still left their profiles up, but she's been wiped out. Okay, this is part 2, the mysterious gene sequence. So something that China forgets here is they can do gene sequencing, and they can, create viruses, and they learned that from the West. They're not the only people that can do that. So a lot of people took a look at these viruses and compared the genetic sequence to other viruses to try to figure out what the hell they're dealing with. And that's something that's done anytime you see a virus. You try to figure out, well, this person just died from some kind of infection. Is it bacterial? Is it a virus? If it's a virus, let's try to figure out what killed them. We don't want other people dying. So they studied this, and they found out that it's very similar to two other viruses sampled from bats in Zhoushan by the People's Liberation Army. So the Army Corps, the Army medical people, found these viruses from 2 species of bats. And, that was documented and discovered by the Army medical people. And then on the right, the Wuhan Coronavirus has an 89.1 nucleotide similarity with one of these viruses from the Army, and it has a 100% amino acid similarity to another virus. So how the heck did that happen? 100%. And these people say that's because it was engineered. The guy on the right says it was reverse engineered. The lady on the left, laboratory driven. It wouldn't happen in nature. It's just impossible for that to happen in nature. We're talking about a virus here with parts of other viruses. So that just doesn't happen in nature. A virus can, mutate and change a little bit, but it's not going to, you can tell by the sequencing. We'll take a look at that. No, we won't. That's in the big presentation. But anyways, they could tell that some of these pieces were patched onto this virus in a laboratory, engineered. So this was published by the Institut Pasteur in Shanghai. This is a French, Pasteur. And, they published something here saying that these S proteins, now the S proteins are the spikes, the little things that, the reason they call it a corona means crown. So these viruses have these things sticking out that they call crowns, or they call them spikes. And that's what's been patched on this virus. So why would somebody patch this? Because this came from another virus where these spikes can infect human cells. Normally a coronavirus can't affect human cells. It has to go through a few iterations of, being altered, going from species to species, like, starting out in a bat and then going to a pig and then, going to humans from pigs. There's no viruses that go straight from a bat to a human. So, and this guy talks about, these S proteins, make it possible for a virus to attack and take over a human cell. And you see that diagram on the left where that's actually what's happening here. Then we have part 3, the discoveries of Dr. Shi Zhengli. So this is she. She's like, called the Bat Lady. She's been studying bats for her entire career. And she's been studying since 2002, 2003. She's been focusing on one thing for her career, is to unlock how a coronavirus can cross species. So this is where things get a little bit confusing. You wouldn't think this was designed to be a biochemical weapon or a bio weapon, because the person that did all the work here is publishing everything that she's doing. And if it was a biological weapon, probably she wouldn't be doing this stuff. She wouldn't be publishing it to the world, what she's working on. But what she is working on here, this effectively demonstrated the direct human infection of SARS-like viruses to humans without the need for an intermediate host. So this has been her life work, is to get these viruses so that they can affect humans. Now, you got to wonder, why are you doing this? And why are you telling the world that you're doing it? Because a lot of people don't like what you're doing. So here we have some papers put out by people that her successful splicing of the SARS virus was a key to opening the door to the cross-species transmission. So what she's done here, this has been documented in a bunch of different papers. She explains, what she's doing here. She's patching on these proteins from another virus. So part 4, the secret of the Wuhan P4 laboratory. So this wasn't, by the time you get to this section in the documentary, you already have the drift of what this documentary is about. But this is a person here on the upper left. The Chinese, social media was going crazy saying, what happened to this girl? This girl worked at this, P4 laboratory in Wuhan, the virus laboratory, and now she's gone. There's no sign of her anywhere. And the laboratory said, yeah, she moved on. She's in some other part of China now. Well, show her to, where's she at? So they can't come up with her because she's dead. She was patient 0. So the upper left is a picture of her in the background there. And then, if you look at the site now, and I tried to look at the site, and she's even more gone than she was when this guy made the documentary. So, there's no sign of her there anymore, but they did have her name up there. So people all over the internet in China are saying, what happened to this girl? She was working in this lab and now she's gone. So then there's a section that's a call to action. Reveal the truth through investigations and some other things. But anyways, I think the reason I put this video together was to give you a little bit of background on China to begin with and explain a little bit about why you want to watch this documentary, because I think it's Pulitzer Prize worthy here. I think this, documentary is really well done, and it should, if it gets seen by enough people, I encourage you to see this. I'll have a link. But, this is a really good piece of work, and if people take this documentary and use the information in here, it can change the world. That's why it's worthy of a prize. And, there's prizes for online media, and that's what this would be appropriate for. Okay, I appreciate your time.